Hello, everyone. This is Courtney Jones with bestreitips.com and also Fast Track to Cash wholesaling product. So today I'm going to show you how to fill out the standard buying, purchase, and sales agreement that comes with the course. So agreement between your company name here at the top and the seller's name there. Let's start with this part. Okay. So a couple things. First of all, this is for when you're buying a property, and you'll see that things are ever so slightly favored to you as the buyer. Okay. I'll point out a few of those things as we go along. Also, if you do not have a company yet, don't let that stop you. You can put your personal name in here. I bought my first probably 20 properties without having an LLC or a corporation because I wanted to make sure I liked this business first, and I didn't know anything about starting a company. So your personal name is fine in there. It's not ideal long term, but it is something you can do to get started. Don't let that stop you from taking action. Also, I need to be able to turn some highlighter on. Okay, so that's the very first thing you're going to do. Then you're going to put the name of the property here, the address, located in what county, and the state of blah. Okay, so again, as always, you want to make sure that you have a local attorney in the state that you're going to be buying in. Review this contract and make sure that it's legit. Now, will they want to add about 500 things to it to make it even longer and charge you more? Yes. But make sure those things are really, truly necessary. Don't complicate this. The simpler the contract, the better for what you're dealing with, especially if you're doing any kind of wholesaling. You don't want to have a 6-page, 7-page contract if you don't need to, okay, in this particular instance. So this tells them that basically everything's going to come with the property, okay, all the things you can read through all of that, and that you're going to send this over to the title company to take care of it, okay? Seller will sell and buyer will buy upon the following terms and conditions, okay? It also says that anything that's added to this contract is going to supersede that which is printed or marked. In other words, if you write anything in here or you make any changes, those things supersede the pre-printed stuff. And as far as completing this contract, you can literally print this out and write in the spaces. You do not have to get fancy and type this. You don't have to get a PDF thing that you can fill in or anything. Like, make it as simple as possible. Whatever works for you, whatever your skill set allows you to complete. Okay. Now, when we get down to the purchase price section here, this is where it can get a little confusing for some people, all right? So ideally, what you're going to be wanting to do is this right-hand column, these things are all going to equal out and total whatever your total purchase price is, okay? So those numbers there should equal this, all right? You'll see a couple things on here that you may or may not use depending on how you're buying properties. I buy most of my prior properties, well, all my properties through creative financing, buying subject to or with seller financing. So I have some sections in here for that. If you're not doing that, you won't even use sections D, E, and F. Okay. If you are doing that, you'll see that you have sections for detailing those details out. Okay. So in a normal transaction, you're going to put some earnest money down. Then you're going to pay the balance due at closing, or you're going to get a new loan. Okay. So the first three are the ones you're going to use primarily most of the time. Okay. If you're wholesaling and you're buying this property, I like to buy properties or put properties under contract that I am going to wholesale with the assumption that if for some reason I cannot get it sold, I'm going to purchase it. So I wouldn't put anything under contract that I wouldn't want to follow through on. So therefore, I'm going to be looking at using either the proceeds of the new loan, which has never really happened, or somehow, some way I'm going to get out of the contract, and I'll show you how to do that as well. I don't like to do that, and it's extremely rare for me to do that, but sometimes it just happens, right? So earnest money, if you're giving them, if you're going to take a check to the title company to hold the earnest money, which is what you should do, then you're going to put earnest money deposit check. You're going to mark a little box right there. Let's say it's $500. You would put 500 in here. Okay. So you're going to be telling them you're going to be paying a purchase price, and you're going to start off with putting $500 as a quote unquote deposit at the title company. $1,000 is also kind of normal. Okay. The balance that will be due at closing, not including closing costs, prepaid items, and prorations, you can put that amount here. Now, often people will ask me, why does it say approximately? That's really because most of my transactions, again, are done sub 2. And oftentimes we're dealing with just kind of at this point, estimated numbers. I'm sitting on their couch. They're telling me, I think I owe about 191,000 left on the property. So we'll put approximately, if I'm giving them, let's say I'm taking over the whole loan, they think they owe 191,000. I'm putting 1,000 down. I owe approximately 190,000 left. Okay. So that's why that's there. But typically you're going to be using exact figures. So earnest money deposit is $1,000. If you're getting a new loan, you would be putting that amount. So let's say, okay, you're going to buy the property for $200,000. You're putting 20,000 down, okay, which leaves 180. Okay. You're putting $1,000 earnest money down, okay, which leaves 179, and you're getting a loan for the remaining 179. Okay. So that would be $1,000 here, 20,000 down, 179 here, new loan. Those things equal 200,000 down at the bottom. Okay. If you know who your new lender is going to be, you can put that here. You can also just put to be determined, or, by a specific date, to be determined by X date, whatever. Okay. Again, all of these things do not have to be used, but if you don't use the space, make sure you put in N/A in it. Okay. So if you're not using these things, put just NA. Okay. That way you're filling in each blank. On these, I tend to just cross them out if I'm not using them for some reason. I'll just put a big red X across them, and then I'll initial and I'll have the seller initial. Anytime you make a change to the documentation, everybody needs to initial it. So if you put a big red X here, make sure everybody initials on the X so that it doesn't look like you made that change after they signed everything. Okay, because that would be a big no-no. So again, this column needs to total the purchase price, which is usually going to be exact. But if you're buying sub 2 or using seller financing usually it's exact as well. Sub 2, we're usually waiting on a statement to come back. So that's where it can be approximate. Okay. And everybody signs the initials at the bottom of each page. The reason I do that is that way it shows I asked you to review each page. If they choose not to read it, that's on them. Obviously, they can have their attorney review it if they want. In this case, the contract states that the seller agrees to pay all closing costs. And again, obviously, that is always negotiable. If you're dealing with somebody in foreclosure, they have no money and you're taking over their loan sub 2 and they're getting no money, then they're not going to have any money to pay for closing costs. So you're dreaming if you think they're going to be able to. You can just cross that out and say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm actually going to do you a favor. Normally, you would pay all the closing costs, but I'm going to go ahead and take care of all those. So you cross that out, you write buyer, you initial, they initial. Okay. All right. So then it goes into the section on prorations. Everything's going to be prorated at closing. Things like association fees, taxes, insurance premiums, the normal things that are prorated, meaning if I'm buying the house in April and you've already paid the taxes for the year, every state does taxes differently, but let's say you pay them already, then obviously I'm going to have to reimburse you I'm going to have to reimburse you for the rest of the year. Okay. So those things are there. Property condition and inspection. This basically just says that the seller is going to give you the property in the same condition as when you looked at it. Okay. And that you have the right. This is the quote unquote out clause that everybody's always looking for. That you have the right to have the property inspected within 25 days. Okay. So this could be a property inspected by your contractor. It could be an actual home inspector, whatever you want. You can have the property inspected within 25 days. So this gives you your out, one of several. Seller warrants that there's no defects to the property, to their knowledge, that seller is going to fix anything you ask them to fix, or you're going to take the property as is. And so it goes into the details that people are going to ask, and then you just have to kind of point it out to them. Okay. Occupancy talks about the fact that the occupancy is going to be given to the buyer, me, in the same way that I'm looking at it. So if I'm looking at it with tenants in it, then I'm expecting that there's going to be tenants in it when I'm closing on it. If I'm looking at it and it's vacant, I expect that it's going to be vacant. If you allowed squatters to come in, then it's your responsibility, Mr. Seller, to get those out. And of course, as always, people do the best they can with what they have, so that may not happen. You may have to deal with squatters. Personal property included in the purchase price of the following equipments. We literally have everything in there: stove, dishwasher, refrigerator, etc. Again, you can cross those out in initial next to anything that is not going to be included. Also, items specifically excluded. Sometimes people will say, hey, this is my great great grandmother's chandelier. It's been passed down through 4 generations. I'm going to take that with me. Make them feel better. Write that in there so that that's not part of the agreement. Seller warrants property is zoned residential. And then if there's any discovered proposed zone changes that are unacceptable to the buyer may void this agreement. So another way to get out if need be. Until title is delivered, seller agrees to maintain all things. So in other words, if the heating unit goes out 2 weeks before closing, the seller does need to get the heating unit repaired. They can't just say, oh, sorry, it broke and I'm closing in 2 weeks. I'll let the new person deal with that. Okay. This insurance and risk loss talks about what happens if the property is destructed, let's say by like a fire or something like that. So we put it under contract today, knock on wood, tomorrow it burns to the ground. This talks about what happens if there's less than 10% of an issue. Then I get to decide if I still want to move it. We'll have those discussions. Okay. Transfer of title and closing basically says that the seller is going to give me a general warranty deed, and that there's no delinquent taxes owed, liens, or encumbrances, that that the seller is going to take care of any of those prior to closing. Again, unless we agree otherwise. If seller tells you they have an $8,000 IRS lien and you agree to purchase it with that, you're going to write that in another section. Okay. This is where you fill in the closing date. Closing will be held on or about whatever day and year. Okay. So you pick that, usually 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks out, sometimes 48 hours out, just depends on what you're agreeing to with the seller. Okay. And so that's where you fill that in. Default talks about what happens if either party defaults. Now, this is one of the paragraphs that I do go over with in detail with them. Being in Arizona, I'm in a very high guru area and also very high investor area. And a lot of investors like to be a little unscrupulous and go behind your back and try to market. Once you start marketing your deal, they'll try to get the seller to do a contract with them. And then lo and behold, the seller doesn't want to close. Now, if you build good rapport, this rarely will happen, but sometimes people are very unscrupulous and dishonest. So you have to protect yourself. So I actually do read this paragraph to them and explain to them what this means. So this basically says that if the default is by the buyer, that's me, the seller shall be able to retain the earnest money as satisfaction and full recourse and settlement to any claims or obligations. So in other words, Mr. Seller, if I back out of this deal for reasons that are not outlined and allowed here in the contract, you get to keep the $1,000. Okay. If the seller defaults under this agreement, the buyer may seek specific performance, meaning the buyer may make you sell the house, or elect to receive the return of the deposit without thereby waiving any action. Okay. If the seller refuses to sell for any reason other than those outlined herein, like title exam fees or all title exam fees or any other expenses paid, including marketing expenses by the buyer, will be paid for and reimbursed by seller. So what I basically do when I explain this to them is I say, here's what happens sometimes, Mr. Seller. And I know this would not happen with you because you seem to be an extremely ethical person. But a lot of times I'll start to market the house to get it sold. And another investor will see the address and they'll come to you and they'll say, whatever she paid you, I'll pay you $100 more. Or sometimes they'll say, I'll pay you $1,000 more. It's for them. It's not about doing good deals and being scrupulous business people. It's about winning at all costs. So if they do that, obviously, sometimes for some people, that would make them say, okay, great. I'll definitely do it if I can get an extra $100 or an extra $500 or whatever, right? So then they go under contract with another person. Well, here's the thing. Once we sign all of this, you have a legally binding agreement and it is a contract. And so I can go after you to make you sell the house with the terms that we've agreed here. Now, again, I know you wouldn't do this, but that's just what this paragraph says. And I can also have you reimburse me for any fees that I have involved already, any title fees, and also any marketing expenses. So as soon as I leave here, I call my marketing team and we start running Facebook ads. We start doing all the things that we do to market the property to get it sold quickly. So immediately that ticker symbol is kind of clicking away with dollars adding up. And this paragraph says that, again, I know you wouldn't do it, but if you were to try to sell it to somebody else for a higher price, you're probably not going to get more money because you're going to owe me that money for marketing expenses. That's how I describe it. And then I have them initial and I initial. Okay. And then that way it's been clearly explained to them. Purchase money note is the paragraph that you would use if you are doing any kind of owner financing. So if they're doing a carryback of $10,000 for 60 months, you're going to write that right in here. Amount of $60,000 for a period of 60 months, which includes principal and interest payments of blank. Okay, so you just look up an amortization schedule, Google the words free amortization schedule, put the numbers in there, and it'll tell you exactly what that payment is and when they will begin. Okay. Your title company or escrow company will then use this to create the promissory note and the deed of trust or mortgage, depending on your state, with all these terms to make sure that the seller's note is protected. Okay. This next, survival of the agreement. Assignment, basically all contracts are assignable unless they say otherwise, but this basically just says we have the right to assign this contract. This agreement is executing this contract. The buyer has remedy for breach of contract by the seller to record a memorandum of contract to enforce my rights as the buyer and interest to the property. So again, it goes back to that previous contract paragraph, basically saying if another investor comes along, I do have the right when I leave here to file a memorandum in which clouds the title. So if somebody else were to try to get the property under contract, they wouldn't be able to sell it till they call me to get me to sign off on that. And guess what that comes with? It comes with a fee. So if somebody were to try to go around me, then there is not only do I ask the seller to pay back any expenses as noted per above, but I also would ask the buyer to pay expenses to have the lien removed. So that's what this paragraph says. It also says that with the signing of this agreement, buyer, me, has equitable interest and also the right to market said property in the form of any advertising and marketing they choose, including but not limited to the MLS. So that gives me the right to market the property, which you need to be able to market the property in many states. And also, if you're not a licensed agent, unless you have equitable interest, you don't have the right. So this paragraph gives you that right, but double check with your attorney. Next, we go down here and there's a subject to partner's approval. Again, another area where you can quote unquote get out if you want to, if your partner doesn't agree on something or anything within the contract. So that's just sort of another, clause that says, hey, my partner doesn't agree with the numbers on this. I'm sorry, I have to back out. Again, we don't want to do this regularly. We don't want to be unscrupulous and we don't want to treat people poorly, but we do want to have some abilities to make changes if we have to. Okay. If the balance shown by the lender's statement of account shows a higher payoff, the purchase price shall be changed by this amount and the cash due from the buyer at the closing or seller financing shall be reduced. If no cash is due, then seller agrees to pay any shortage. That paragraph is basically because, again, most of my transactions are sub 2. So if somebody tells me they think their balance is $91,000 and I agree that I'm going to pay them $95,000, so I'm going to give them $4,000 at closing. And then we pull the title and find out that the balance is actually $94,500. So now that allows me to reduce their amount of cash coming to the $500. Okay. So that's what this says. So if buyer is purchasing sub 2, first payment shall be due 30 days after closing and possession, but not before. Okay. There's no other agreements, promises, or understandings between the party. In other words, if we were to go to court, seller says, oh yeah, well, that's all there in writing, but she told me ... in addition, and that's not here. This basically says, yeah, no, this is the entire agreement. Okay. Under Arizona law. So again, you need to have your attorney in your state review this and agree to it. This is where I have to have a disclosure because I'm a licensed agent. So it says one or more members of Buyers LLC is a licensed agent working on their own behalf for their own personal investment and inventory. Licensed agent and buyer's intention is to make a large profit on this transaction as and they are not representing anyone else in this transaction except themselves. So this is basically just a disclosure that basically helps in the courts supposedly say it, a lot of times people are be like, oh, I didn't know you were going to make that much off of it or whatever. So this is where I just say to them, look, I plan on making a very large profit. I don't do business to make $1,000. So I'm going to, whether I fix this property up or I flip it, the contract, or depending on what I'm going to do with this, I intend to make a large profit. I'm helping you. I'm giving you what you want, but obviously my business needs to make some money as well. So I'm sort of just throwing that in there as per all the required. If you are not a licensed agent and no one in your company is a licensed agent, you can just remove that paragraph. Okay. And then this one just says time is the essence of this agreement, signed, sealed, and delivered. And what I will do is have them sign it and then date it. And they do it here. I do it up here. And I do remind them right before they're signing it. I'll just say something to the effect of, just so you know, after we both sign this, we do have a legally binding contract, as we discussed. I will be scanning this right here in your presence and sending it to the title company and opening escrow immediately. And so what I do then after they sign is I scan it. I have an iPhone, so I use the notes feature, which allows you to scan. Excuse me. I'll scan the document. I'll forward it in an email to my title company and I'll CC the seller on it. And then I'll give the title company the seller's information, name, address, phone number, and email, and a little bit of details about when and how to get a hold of them. They work 9 to 5, call after 5, or email is preferred or whatever. Now, all parties have that contract. Escrow has been opened. The seller does need to get a copy of the contract for it to be legally binding in most states. So this is the deliverance aspect of the contract as well. And that is that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this training and you want to learn more or want to understand how to wholesale real estate for quick cash, check out my Fast Track to Cash wholesaling course at enroll.bestreitips.com. Also hit that subscribe button down below. Give us some love. Thanks for joining.